Chapter 17. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table the next morning when Jason pattered in, yawning as he rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. "Where's Mom? Did she come home last night?" Daniel shook his head. "No, she didn't." "Why not?" Daniel motioned to a chair across from him. "Have a seat, I'll explain what I know." "Dad?" His son didn't move, worry lines accompanying a deepening frown. Daniel pointed to the chair a second time, and after a brief hesitation, Jason finally lowered himself into it. He peered into his son's face. Mom was arrested. As he spoke, his body shuddered. Saying the words aloud made them somehow more real. "Arrested?" Something like relief, confusion, and distress mingled in Jason's face. Daniel knew this was a better answer than some he'd feared, but once he processed the full impact, the truth would give rise to new questions. Yes, she's in jail at her agency building. Did she break the law? Daniel sighed. She did the right thing. After that, it's complicated. Jason nodded slowly, accepting this. Okay. He paused, then looked up at his father. Can she apologize? Daniel glanced away and closed his eyes. Such an innocent question. No, it doesn't work like that. I suppose if they go all the way with this, she'll go to prison. I'm not sure for how long. Dad? Jason hesitated. Should we pray? Daniel's heart melted, and he found it hard not to cry. Of course. Of course we should pray. Why don't you start? They bowed their heads together, and Jason began. He prayed for his mother that she would be safe, that God would change the hearts of the people who put her in jail, that everything would work out. When he finished, Daniel reiterated all the same things, and also added words for his son, that he would be calm and have peace. Daniel tried to believe in what he asked for. When they were done, tears glistened in the corners of Jason's eyes. What are we going to do? Whatever we can. Daniel didn't tell him that he'd spent the entire night awake, combing through code until he found an authorization routine that he could use to break Anna out of jail. In the light of day, the idea seemed a bit absurd. If he pulled it off, what would it buy them? Where would they go? Would he and Anna run from the police taking Jason with them? And how long would it take for them to be caught? He had the skills to invent false records for the family and hack the necessary systems to make them official, but they'd be living for years one slip away from their lives being taken away. And yet, the alternative was moving on without his wife? How long would Jason be without his mother? The conversation with Davis hadn't been encouraging. He realized Jason was still watching him expectantly. To Jason, it was Daniel's responsibility to fix this. If only he had that power. Jason, I need some time to sort this out. If it's all right with you, I'm going to take you to stay with Jackson and Marcus for a few days. His son nodded, eyes somber and lips turned down. Of course, Dad. Whatever you need me to do. Without warning, Daniel felt himself tear up and he started to weep. His son was brave. He would have to be brave as well. Grabbing Jason's hand, he looked him in the eye. We'll figure this out. I promise. He only hoped it was a promise he could keep.
Anna lay in her cell, dressed in the dull gray uniform provided by the guards. She'd not slept well, tossing, turning, and ruminating on the events that had brought her here. Meeting Daniel and giving him the sword had been dangerous, and now she felt foolish for doing it. He had the weapon, and he'd gotten away, but what good would that do her now? No, she decided, giving him the sword hadn't been foolish. Foolish had been coming to the agency with Carrie and Lucas instead of fleeing with him. But at the time, she thought they'd be able to work out an inter-office scuffle. Jada would lower the heat of the situation, push back on Guerrero, and help Carrie and Lucas see that Anna was only trying to protect an advantage against Zhao, the real threat. But Anna hadn't known about the message then. The fake message. Guerrero professed absolute faith in its authenticity, but she had to if she wanted to support her narrative. Did she truly believe Anna would flip on Shaw? She wasn't sure, but the arrest seemed more like a frame job than a genuine attempt to get at Shaw through her. But who would set her up, and why? The maddening part of this was being stuck in a cell holding on to the knowledge that Gary Robertson had been whispering in Ben Jacobs' ear for months, and that Robertson's involvement cast doubt on A Better Way's guilt. Why would Radon Security send someone hundreds of miles away to talk to Ben Jacobs, except to recruit him? But if they'd done this, then Radon was behind the attack on Shaw, not A Better Way. And if Carmina Lopez hadn't sent Jacobs to assassinate Shaw, the incriminating letter from her must have been a fake. Was there an illogical leap here somewhere? She wasn't sure, but the idea of false evidence resonated with her as she brooded on the irony that she, too, was trapped by a falsified document. At first, when Daniel questioned whether Zhao belonged to A Better Way, she'd been skeptical of his doubts. Now she was coming around. Though the vid from Ben Jacobs' tablet had implicated A Better Way, the more she considered this, the more she realized it was far from ironclad proof. Justin Reynaud was an AI construct, perfectly capable of lying and saying whatever he had to. He could easily have claimed to be from A Better Way to leverage Ben's familiarity with the organization. The most concerning aspect to all of this was that, according to Carey, some unknown government entity was already moving on A Better Way, planning arrests of the leadership. This, less than a day after discovering one piece of damning evidence that Anna now doubted. It had all the marks of a setup, just like she was being set up, and from within the government itself. Could it be Elaine Guerrero? A political enemy of Councilwoman Shaw with Washington contacts and now in charge of the investigation? Did she have the position and power to start organizing the takedown of Darren Monk and A Better Way's leadership? This thought caused her skin to prickle. She'd thought of Guerrero as a bureaucratic zealot, but now she feared that maybe something more lurked behind those cold, dark eyes. Her thoughts were interrupted when a containment lockup guard appeared outside her door. Taking notice, she grunted, sat up, and gave the crick in her neck a forceful massage. The guard motioned for her to stand. "You have a visitor." She first thought of Daniel, which sparked both anxiety and gladness. If anyone realized he was her martyr, he was walking straight into the lion's den. But she wanted it to be him anyway, her need to see him overriding her feelings of risk. She rose to her feet and shuffled to the cell door. It was indeed Daniel waiting for her, sitting on the other side of a glass wall, a comm in his hand. No data lenses were allowed in the containment lockup. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. His red hair was never neat, but most of the time he made it work. Now it sprawled across his head in a disheveled mess. She assumed her own didn't look much better. Smiling despite the circumstances, she picked up the companion comm. "Anna." He breathed her name into the device as soon as they were connected. She sensed his strain. "Daniel." She wasn't sure what to say. Everything sounded awkward in her head. She settled on asking after their son. "How's Jason?" "He's okay. I took him to Marcus's place while I figure out what to do." "They'll be recording us." She needed him to be careful. He chuckled bitterly. "I don't have anything to say that they'd be interested in. In fact, I don't know who they are. I just want to understand why my wife is in jail." He gave this last statement a sharp edge. "Ask my boss. I've been framed." He raised his eyebrows. "Framed?" "Yes. Guerrero has a letter purporting to be from Councilwoman Shaw, instructing me to do something illegal, to delete data from the agency. But the message isn't real. I never received it, and wouldn't have done what it asked." He frowned. "No, I can't imagine you would." "Tell that to Guerrero." She watched him take this in. He studied her, working out what it meant, that she'd been set up. Of course, he knew about the mods, the sword, and the fight in the transport station. He'd been there, but the letter was new, and a setup implied corruption. So, how long are they going to hold you here? Is this temporary or a more permanent situation? I have no idea. It's in Guerrero's hands, at least for the near future. She's demanding that I turn on Shaw, to admit I worked for her. Guerrero wants to take down Shaw? It sure looks that way, and it makes sense given that she works for Redmond. Daniel tilted his eyes up toward the low ceiling above them as if searching for something. After a moment, he looked back at her and leaned forward, his face changed into something new, a mixture of curiosity and intensity. Her body reacted by tensing with heightened awareness, familiar with this version of her husband. He looked this way when he was untangling a challenge, on the cusp of solving a puzzle, or about to deliver the winning stroke in a game. His eyes locked onto hers. When we talked yesterday, you told me you were working on something. How far did you get? He was referring to the recordings from the cash machine, the ones which identified Gary Robertson, though he wouldn't know that part. She measured her words. How much could she say, knowing they were being recorded? Far enough. I found a loose thread. That you didn't have a chance to pull? She nodded. But you can't pull it in here, I guess. She huffed and drew back with frustration. No, this place is not conducive to detective work. I wouldn't think so. His tone sounded dejected, but his eyes told her a different story. Not loss, not giving up. Executing a plan. Still leaning away from him, she took care not to react, instead taking a deep breath and calming her body to give her mind time to process. What was he telling her? And then she got it. He had a hack. Some way that would let her pull the final thread. He would break her out, and she would go after Robertson. She shifted forward, eyes still connected with his, now widening the slightest amount to show her understanding. The edges of his mouth curved up, and she dipped her head in a nearly imperceptible motion that communicated one inaudible word. Yes. In an instant, Daniel's countenance changed. He looked away as his eyes grew wet. The transformation was almost shocking, but not a lie. Just a different side of the same man. He spoke with a trembling tenderness. I don't want this for you, Anna. To see you this way after everything you've done is... His voice trailed off. Her own tears gathered. Oh, Daniel, it's awful. I feel so betrayed. Even Jada, she sat there and said nothing. She put her hand up to the glass, and he matched it with his own. They existed together in silence until the guard came to take her back to her cell, their time up. I have to go. She dropped to a soft whisper. I love you. I love you too. I'll be back soon. Anna knew he would be, and when he came for her, she'd be ready.
Daniel sat in the kitchen watching the evening sun fade into darkness through the apartment window. He dressed warmly tonight in a comfortable black long-sleeved shirt and matching pants. A backpack lay before him next to a staff handle he'd purchased earlier in the day. Daniel had modded the weapon with all the typical agency capabilities, plus the usual array of mods he'd developed for Anna over the years. He'd done this same work on the weapon she'd taken to El Paso. In addition to the staff, the kitchen table held the sword hilt, a pair of gold-colored bracelets, and a new data lens. They were the tools he'd need to break Anna out. He wondered if tonight would be the last time he ever sat here, if tomorrow and after he and Anna would be on the run. He prayed not. She'd said she had a thread to pull, and he hoped that meant some kind of resolution for their family. An incoming notification surprised him, and when he checked, he found Lisa's name. Uncertain what to expect, he answered. Hello? Daniel. Her voice was hesitant. I wanted to call you sooner. I just didn't know what to say. If it helps, I don't either. You're still in El Paso? Yes. Her tone was bitter. I can't go into details, but they're keeping me here. I half assume it's to keep me away from Anna. I saw her yesterday, in the lockup. How's she doing? She's holding up. She said she's been framed. Framed? How? By whom? Lisa's rapid-fire questions pelted Daniel through his data lens. He drew in a quick breath and tried to give her what information he had. Apparently, there's a message from Shaw telling her to delete the vid from the data center. And Guerrero thinks she did it? That's crazy. You and I were with her when Simon went offline. We were, but as her husband and her partner, we aren't great alibis. As for who, Anna has suspected someone in the agency as a bad actor. Could it be Guerrero? Lisa hesitated a beat before responding. I don't think so. One of the reasons for our suspicion is because of the failed sting on those stolen tablets 2 weeks ago. That was before Guerrero came to Houston. Then I have no idea. It's still unnerving that Guerrero showed up out of nowhere and now my wife is in jail. Not nowhere. Lisa's voice started to increase in intensity. From Washington. They don't know how we operate here. If they'd moved quicker on the tools we need, maybe all of this could have been avoided. Daniel often wondered about this, because mods weren't the only way Anna bent the rules. Sometimes she went places without a warrant, or even took actions beyond what the law allowed. But such was the nature of rule bending. Once you've crossed the line for the sake of necessity, the next one is only a short hop away. Lisa hadn't finished her frustrated protest. I think I may quit the agency. That probably sounds like letting them win, but pretending like everything is fine while my partner rots behind bars feels like letting them win even more. I get it. I couldn't stay. Not working for them. Anna says even Director Davis didn't stick up for her. That is what I've gathered, which is so odd. Jade has always been on our side, providing us with everything we've needed to do our jobs. I can't believe she'd sit back and allow this to happen. I can't either, from what Anna has told me about her. An awkward silence filled the connection between them. Daniel didn't have anything else to say. I should let you go, but I'll check in on you when I get back into town. That's kind of you. It's going to be hard on all of us for a little while. We're all going to need allies. He heard her pause. Daniel? Yeah? Another hesitation. Never mind. As I said, I'll look you up. Thank you, Lisa. We'll talk again soon. After the call clicked off, he replayed the conversation in his mind. He'd slipped up saying allies when it was not the language of a grieving husband needing support. Lisa had caught it, but didn't say anything, though she might have guessed he was planning something. Either way, she understood someone sent a shock through his body. Well, to remember that. Subterfuge was traditionally Anna's territory. He had a lot of catching up to do. He used the kitchen MMD to make himself a bowl of beef stew, something hearty to keep him fueled for the evening to come. When he finished eating, he cleaned up and put everything away. Checking the time, he noted he had a few hours to kill. He wanted to make sure the area around the agency would be as void of people as possible. Using his data lens, he started to browse the code he decompiled from the sword hilt, continuing in his efforts to gather evidence for a project he was working on. The biggest fear for those going after Zhao were her non-failsafe swords. As long as she wielded the power to manipulate human bodies, with a mere command to her weapons she could disable or potentially kill anyone who got close to her. He wanted to write a protective mod to counteract this. Preventing MMDs from tampering with inanimate objects was a simple enough task. People and businesses tagged items they owned in order to limit who could access them, law enforcement overrides notwithstanding. This procedure didn't carry over to living things, however. Tagging plants, animals, and humans was easy, but devising a security system that could stop the manipulation was impossible until someone figured out how the process actually worked. Understanding a mechanism was critical to preventing it. But Feeney had figured it out, and then Zhao had stolen the tech and used it in her swords. If she and the men shared code on their weapons, and he guessed they would, then even though the sword Anna had taken was failsafe limited, it might contain routines for manipulating Lazarus particles. If he found them, they would demonstrate how it was done, and he'd be able to write a new countermod. It might not work against all theoretical living matter manipulation, but it didn't have to. It only had to work against Zhao. He poured a few hours into this task, eventually identifying a module that looked promising before his alarm went off and notified him it was time to move. He briefly struggled to pull himself away until he remembered that Anna waited for him. Pushing the code aside, he stood up and pulled on the bracelets. He picked up the heavy backpack and heaved it over his shoulder, attaching the data lens and the 2 weapon handles to it. Though it looked casual enough, the pack was a portable matter container connected to the new staff and his bracelets. He wanted to make sure he had everything they would need to get out of the lockup. Walking to the front door of the apartment, he turned off the power with the hope he'd be back soon to turn it back on. He took a bus to the agency, or rather one building over from it. Stepping out into the building he intended to break into didn't seem wise. After riding the elevator down to the ground level and exiting onto the lawn between the buildings, he found the night black and empty. He adjusted his data lens in order to see and made his way over to the south side of the building, the same area where Zhao had penetrated into the basement. A spot good enough for her was good enough for him. He had a schematic of the building and moved over to a place where he could create a hole down into the data center. As he looked at the ground before him, the idle thought slipped into his mind that if this were real grass, he'd have to dig through the first few feet with a shovel. As a speaker at Saturday night's meetup had pointed out, all the grass in the city was fake. In this moment, he was thankful for that. Daniel Flynn. The sound of a low, woman's voice sent a shock through his body.